Hello and welcome to the VSC podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma, or those who've experienced violence, and have conversations about social issues. My name is Hannah Jenarine, my pronouns are she, her, and I am the Violence Prevention Educator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. In this podcast, we discuss sensitive topics such as violence and sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. For the Florida State Sexual Helpline, call 888-956-7273. And by contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. In today's episode, I have with me Max Payne, who uses they/them pronouns, and who is also one of VSC's amazing interns. Today, we will be speaking about their personal experience and learning how to hold space with a disability and how they've learned how to self-advocate. Max, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk to you about a little bit about disability pride and what it means to me.
So can you first start off by sharing with our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Max. I'm 28. I just recently celebrated a birthday in May.
Woo.
I'm a non-binary transmasculine person. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a counseling graduate student in Orlando, and I'm planning to work with queer family systems to navigate challenges surrounding their identity, whether it be family or relationship dynamics, and like just overall acceptance as well.
That's
I'm
amazing.
also a I'm also a former intern for VSC and current volunteer, cat parent, and plant lover and avid gardener.
I remember that. And Max is an amazing person, everyone. So just know that this podcast is going to be a vibe. So, Max, can you tell us a little bit more about your disability and how it has impacted your life?
Yeah, so when I was about a month old, my parents took me to my first month checkup, as they do, and found that my head size was a little too large for normal, and there was fluid surrounding my brain that wasn't draining properly. So it's technically hydrocephalus. So I was diagnosed at a month old with that, and they basically put me under surgery, did essentially brain surgery on me as an infant, and put a like plastic tubing to drain the fluid from around my brain. And that kind of the fluid, if it presses too hard on your brain, it like causes brain damage. So the right side of my body is a smidge underdeveloped compared to my left. And so I've been navigating, whether it be like growing up wearing foot braces and hand braces when I sleep, and like not being able to open certain doors with my right hand, or wear a size different shoe because my right foot is smaller. Those kinds of things were things I navigated as like a young person. But when I was 25, I actually got diagnosed with cerebral palsy. So that's interesting because most people get diagnosed when they're like in their like first couple of years. But I found that out because I was figuring out complications with what the plastic tubing that was implanted. I thought something was wrong with that or it was broken. Come to find out, it is broken, but it's okay. Um, Everything's fine with that. So it's been interesting to navigate like this new term, and like a more accepted diagnosis, I guess, within myself of like, hey, this is like a real thing. Like you're not just different from everybody else. There's like a label for it. I also got diagnosed with ADHD when I was 27, so a lot of like late stage diagnoses in my life.
And how has these diagnoses, how have they impacted your life? So, I mean, being diagnosed at 25 and then 27, it kind of helps you realize, okay, so all this time, there was a label, like you said. So has this impacted your life, like now that you have a label, like positively or negatively? Like
Yeah.
what's
Hmm. I think negatively, I'll start with the negatives of it just being when I was younger, I was kind of like a giraffe, like a newly born giraffe walking around. Like I would trip over my feet. I had to go to therapy, like physical therapy to strengthen my right side and learn how to walk with these braces on my feet. And it was kind of I remember it being painful when like my right foot would turn inward, or bow inward, and so the brace was meant to correct
Mhm.
that bowing. So it would hurt when it would correct that bowing, and I remember hating the braces and not ever wanting to wear them or show them because I was different. So I didn't wear shorts as a kid, which probably translates to my dislike of shorts now for some reason. But um, it's been interesting to navigate. It's mostly the negative is like societal pressures. Um, so like the fact that I can't open a jar or a door, or I have trouble like buttoning the sleeves of my shirts. Um, and the idea that I can't ask for help because it's something that somebody else would be able to do is one of the negative impacts that I've seen through my life. But positively, I would say um, having a label that accurately describes what I'm going through has helped me find community. I've been able to um, relate to other people, whether it be like through our struggles, through our upbringing of like what physical therapy did you do? Like, oh, do you remember like doing this thing? Or like how does it impact you? And talking to other people about their experiences really validated my own experiences and made me feel like I was part of something bigger.
Thank you for sharing that, Max. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term ableism, this refers to stereotypes and negative biases that are held towards those who have a disability. So for example, assuming that someone who has a disability leads an unhappy and a limited life, that they can't do things for themselves, suggesting that they are inspirational for handling everyday tasks and activities, and there are so many other more. And in the research that I was doing, there was a term that I came across that was internalized ableism. So, internalized ableism occurs within people who have a disability, and it's essentially when these individuals, when they start to believe that their disabilities really do make them inferior and worthless because they're heavily influenced by the biases, the prejudices, and the negative stereotypes that are being, misconstrued and misconcepted around having a disability. Have you ever experienced internalized ableism, Max? And if so, what has been your journey like in overcoming these feelings of inadequacy?
Ooh, that's a big question because absolutely, yes, I have experienced internalized ableism in pretty much every aspect of my life, whether it be um, like cognitively through my ADHD, whether it be physically through my cerebral palsy. Um, it's hard to navigate, like you said, everyday tasks sometimes, and like I mentioned before, just it's this societal pressure, right? It's not even like me doing anything wrong or different or inferior or anything. It's the society, like society puts on this idea of like, if you're going to be productive, you need to do X, Y, and Z. If you're going to be a member of the society, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So um, I I have this like would have this feeling of like I'm slacking off, I'm different, you know, these inadequacies, like instead of finding accommodations for myself and making it easier for my life, I kind of just pushed through the struggle and because I was supposed to do it like everybody else. So um, being able to say like, no, I do need help. I do need to have accommodations, certain things. Um, it would it gives reason to why I can't do some of the things, and it allows me to say to myself, like, give yourself a little grace, like, yes, you are different. Yes, like your life is different from other people, but um, it doesn't need to be any more difficult. So having those accommodations and being able to navigate life in a little bit of a different way um, has been like instrumental for me.
Thank you, Max. So usually when people think of someone who has a disability, they automatically go to like physical appearances. So for
Mhm.
example, if someone doesn't look like they have a disability or if they're not in a wheelchair, then society automatically thinks, well, then they don't have it that bad. Or are you sure they're disabled? Or, once again, they're not like disabled enough. So my question for you is, how have you experienced feelings of not being disabled enough? And what situations or experiences have led to you having these feelings?
Yeah. So for those listening, I do not appear in any shape or form to have a disability other than the fact that I limp a little bit. So for all intents and purposes, I would appear to not have a disability. So um, the biggest thing for me has been the strength-based narrative that people say like, oh, it's not that bad, or um, oh, you were a miracle baby is what I would get a lot as a kid. Because if uh if my condition at a month old had been like missed or they waited to do surgery, I could have been in a wheelchair. I could have had a lot more issues physically and cognitively as well. But because I was able to go on and do school without much help with and was able, I can run, I can walk, I can do all these things that would consider me to be normal. Um, it was the fact that I could do things well enough that it was like, oh, you're a miracle. You're like a productive member of society. And it's when those little things would come up, I would say like, oh, like why aren't you enough, essentially? Um, like buttoning my shirt, like the sleeves on my shirt for like a collared shirt, I would say like, oh, like I would struggle for long periods of time trying to navigate it, when I could have just asked someone in my house for help.
Mhm.
Um, so it's taking back that that label that has been like in like able for me to say like, no, I do need the help. And while like people are not necessarily going to see me as disabled when I'm walking down the street, um, I have been trying to um, release myself from that pressure, and say like, no, this is my truth, and what that means to me is, it doesn't matter what everybody else thinks, you know what I mean?
So, based on these experiences and these feelings, do you still find that there are times in your life, like today, where these feelings still come up? Like the fear of asking for help, of not feeling like you're not disabled enough. Do they still come up every now and then? Or do you think you've gotten to the point where, no, this is what I need and I'm okay with this and I'm okay with who I am?
I was actually just thinking about that, like getting ready for this recording, because it's almost like hour by hour, like situation by situation, like how I'm feeling, of whether or not I can tackle a situation the able-bodied way. Um or whether or not I do need help, and say like, no, I'm gonna claim that I need help and will ask for it. Um or there are some times when I say like, oh, I do need help, but I'm not going to ask for it because I'm not in a space of like asking for help. I'm not in a space of being able to confront that part. Um, so it does happen every day,
Mm,
multiple times a day. But it's just something that I have to continuously reassure myself and remind myself of, that things are going to be hard and different for me, but that doesn't make my life any less.
I love that. I love it. That's a great self-affirmation. I love that. Look at you, Max. So, Max, how have these feelings impacted your sense of identity and belonging within the disability community?
Hmm. Well, I'm still definitely getting used to the label and having like insane imposter syndrome when it comes to even recording this podcast. Because I think to myself, am I disabled enough to take up this space? Should there be someone who's, quote, more disabled than me sharing their experience, or has more experience with the label, um, to record this podcast? So it's an everyday thing as well, being able to reaffirm my belonging in the space. And that's one thing that the VSC has really helped me with, in terms of like my internship. I was able to do a lot of research and digging on accessibility services and accessibility in general. And it's really like ignited a passion for me for accessibility and equality and equity. So
Mhm.
that's been really cool, and really helpful for me as a person, but also um, furthering like my knowledge and career as well.
And how have you learned to self-advocate for yourself?
Mhm. Well, asking for those accommodations, like being able to say like, no, I need this, please help me, has been a big one. Asking for help in general has always been hard for me. um, and then also fighting for inclusive spaces and um, information research, listening to people that um, have those experiences to speak on from like other disabled folks, and saying like, we need to listen to the people who are having these lived experiences. And I've followed so many Instagram pages,
Mhm.
um, and people who are just so beautiful in their ability to spread awareness, to advocate for themselves and the community. And it's really helped me like uplift myself, just seeing the representation out there as well.
You mentioned that you also struggle with imposter syndrome from time to time. So,
Mhm.
what advice would you give to someone who is listening to this podcast who does have a disability and who is struggling with similar feelings of feeling inadequacy? So, for example, if someone is feeling that they're undeserving of accommodations or accessible resources within the disability community, what would you recommend them to do, or like how can they navigate through these feelings as well?
Yeah. So for those listening, give yourself a little grace. Healing is not linear, and claiming identities is also not linear. Society is ableist as a whole, and it takes time to unpack that narrative. So being able to say that you're disabled one day doesn't necessarily mean that the next you will claim that label. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've had to learn as well, is um, coming into yourself, and the labels that you identify with aren't going to necessarily be stagnant. They may flow, they may change, and that goes for the LGBTQ plus community as well. And so, in that same way, it's important to give yourself the time and space to understand yourself, what you're needing, asking for those accommodations, but also giving yourself the space to say, I'm not feeling it right now.
Mhm.
Um, I'm I may or may not be disabled and I am struggling. Um, but there's so much to be said about being able to sit with your emotions and say, like, this right now sucks, but we're going to get through it. And the only way to get through it is to get through it. So might as well get through it, right?
Mhm.
So I think that would be my advice, is to just give yourself grace, and know that the labels that you need will come to you, and um, the community that you need will also come to you.
I also want to add something to that, Max. As someone who I do not have a disability, and for those of you who are listening who do not have a disability, when it comes to labels, like from, I guess, a perspective who's with some for someone who does not have a disability, it's very easy to once again assign these stereotypes to that label. So for example, like a homeless person, we automatically think, okay, they're homeless. And within that label, we also have these unconscious biases and these negative attitudes and perceptions towards them. But the truth is, that label, that does not define them as who they are as a person. Like a
Right,
homeless person is not homeless, they're just a person without a home. A disabled
right,
person is not someone who's disabled. They're a person who has a disability. So
right,
it's important that when you do see someone who has a disability or who has a physical disability, but also know that there are people who don't have those physical disabilities. And it's important that you don't assign that label to who they are as a person, because there's so much more than that. So when it comes to people who have disabilities, embrace it, acknowledge it, but just know that that's not like who you are, because who you are is so much more than what you were born with, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So,
Well, and that goes back to when I introduced myself. I didn't say I'm a disabled person.
mhm.
I mentioned my love of plants, the fact that I'm a cat parent,
Yes,
um, my gender identity, but none of those things necessarily define me, just as much as being disabled doesn't define you.
exactly. Thank you, Max, for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, how can we work to create a more inclusive and accepting society for people with disabilities, regardless of their level of impairment or identity within the disability community?
Sure. I think beginning by getting into the habit of asking about accommodations in general, like the same way that you would ask about food allergies, or pronouns, or anything that would be like hey, like we're using the food example, like, hey, we're going to Chipotle, for instance, not sponsored. Uh, we're like, if we're going to Chipotle, hi, like, do you have like a cilantro allergy? What accommodations do you need? The same way it would be, okay, we're hosting a presentation. Do you have any accommodations that you need? Whether it be closed captioning or an ASL interpreter, those kinds of questions just need to be integrated into your everyday conversations to normalize it. So like, because food allergies aren't shameful, so why should
Exactly.
accommodations for physical and cognitive disabilities be shameful either? So that's one thing. Checking to see if events and venues have access when you host things, when you invite people over to your space, um, saying like who's going to be able to get in is also a good one, because you don't want, like, if you're trying to provide an inclusive space to people, you don't want to, by choosing a specific venue, um, implicitly excluding someone. Um, and I think the last point I'll make on this is that inclusion comes in the smallest of packages that really don't uh, require too much effort. In the same way that asking for someone's pronouns doesn't take more than 2 seconds. Um, it's being mindful of the ways in which people navigate this world and the fact that they're may or may not be different from yours, and just being cognitive of that.
I love that. And I love how you said like the food allergies because I know people who like they are like I have a peanut allergy and they want the whole world to know. Like don't eat
Right.
anything with peanuts. And it's so true. It's like if we are so open and accepting to like people who have food allergies, because now that I think about it, every time I'm invited to a conference or every time I go somewhere, they always ask, what's your diet? Do you eat meat? Are you, allergic to anything? And then they have those accommodations. So when it
Yeah.
comes to like organizations as well, it's important that people who have, who are offering services and who are hosting events, they ask that question. Do you have any accommodations? Even as, going into Chipotle and asking, hey, like, are there any allergies? Do you have any accommodations that you can need? Asking that question is so simple as asking for someone's pronouns. And I love how you said that. And I think if we just, as a society, like if each person started asking that question, we could definitely change like the narrative and start, you know, accepting and normalizing it. And this way, people who have disabilities, they're like, yeah, I have a disability. This way they can own it and, really embrace who they are.
Yeah.
So, Max, can you share any positive experiences or moments of empowerment that has helped you feel more confident and validated as someone who has a disability?
Hmm. Well, besides being on this podcast, I think like not a specific moment, but being able to find community of people who have similar experiences has been like so instrumental to me for like my empowerment to say, I'm not alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
I have people behind me that are fighting for the same equal rights um, for access, for accommodations, for all of the things that will make an equal playing field, to um, have us be in spaces together, for disabled folks to be able to show up. Um, and I think that's empowering in itself, is to see yourself represented in spaces,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just to say like, hey, we're here. It's almost like I equate a lot of the my identity to being queer, but also the disabled community, like in that same way. It's like we're here, we're queer, we're here, we're disabled, and it that being able to say that and be recognized for that and welcomed as well.
Mm-hmm. How can non-disabled people be better allies to those who experience these feelings of not being disabled enough?
I have three things. So first thing is listen. Listen to disabled people, listen to their experiences, what they have to say, how you can accommodate them, how you can talk about them. Because like you mentioned before, some disabled folks don't like being called disabled people, but more people with disabilities. So person first versus
Label.
label first. So listening to their preferences on the way that you speak about them, listening to their experiences, but also believing their experiences and not discounting them or trying to use a strength-based narrative of, oh, but you're a miracle. Oh, you do X, Y, and Z so well. Why can't you do A, B, and C? Coming from a place of just believing them and accepting them. And then the third thing is to take a moment to consider how to include us. To say, like, what are the steps into a building? To say, what are the steps to get into a presentation, virtual or in person? What are the steps to invite my friend over to my home? These are the things that able-bodied people don't think about on a daily basis. And I think that's important to note, is that you're in a different space as well. So like inviting someone into your space, you want to be as accommodating as possible. So how can you make them feel welcome?
I love that. I love that. Max, thank you so much. Is there one other thing, like one thing after listening to this podcast that you want people to take with them on their like day-to-day activities? If there's one thing you could tell somebody, what would that be?
Yeah. For all my disabled baddies out there, you are enough. I think that's the biggest thing, disabled or otherwise, you are enough. And to all my non-disabled and able-bodied folks out there listening, to be allies, take note of how many restrictions you see in your day-to-day life, of what could hinder someone from entering your space. And I think that was the biggest thing for me to realize when coming into this identity, was noting how many different roadblocks there are in my everyday life to navigate for people with different disabilities. So just take note of that, and it's a really humbling realization once you do.
Max, thank you so much. You are someone who has a disability who's also a baddie. So thank you so much for that. You're amazing. And I'm definitely walking away with this conversation. Like, I am going to listen more. I'm going to be more welcoming. And yes, for those of you who have disabilities, you are enough. I hear you. I see you. I acknowledge you. I embrace you. And yeah, Max, thank you so much. You're amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.
The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. The views and opinions expressed by podcast participants are their own, and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. This podcast content is made available for informational and educational purposes, and the VSC does not make any representation on or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the content. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or corrections of errors. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear, and you are not alone.